we're not all in this by ourselves. We're in it together, whether it's a newborn child who has no expectation or clue what to expect, or a new executive director coming into a synagogue in a completely different part of the country. I think there's resources and people we can lean into to help us get to where we need to go.
For many people in the world, there is a moment of clarity when you see the world differently than you saw it previously. Those are the moments when we wake up to life. I'm Rabbi Josh Bennett, and this is Waking Up to Life, a podcast about those moments. Today on the podcast, I have the honor of welcoming the new executive director of Temple Israel. I say new because it's been a couple of years now, but it still feels like you're in your new stage. Jason Plotkin, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here and happy to record this podcast with you after many years of waiting for this opportunity.
So, Jason, the story that you are hoping to share with the audience today is about the moment when you became a father. So, tell us about that time and tell us what came into your mind in that moment.
Yeah. So, my son now, Isaac, is 8 years old, turns 9 later this year. We adopted Isaac, and adoption and for everyone is very different. There's not one cookie cutter. This is how your adoption process goes. And we had an opportunity to meet the mother, Isaac's birth mother, biological mother, for a few weeks before he was born. When he was born, it was very fascinating. My wife was with the birth mother for hours and hours, it felt like. And here I was brought into a room, and there's this child. And I had no clue where my wife was. I had no clue where Isaac's biological mother was at the time. And here I was in a room with this just born child that was going to become obviously a consequential part of my life going forward, without my partner in crime, my wife, who is trained in early childhood education, has been around babies, and who I thought was going to be right there beside me at the beginning. And alas, here I was all by my lonesome with newborn child.
So not only are you a new father in that moment, but you are feeling totally alone in the world with this thing that is now in your arms that you're responsible for.
That's correct. And, the thing is, the hospital wasn't necessarily accustomed to working with families who were going through an adoption process. So that was also an interesting challenge for the first 2 days we were there. But here I am. I have no clue how to feed the child, no clue how to do simple things as change a diaper, et cetera. And I am just at loss. Luckily, the nurses were amazing. And, I still had no clue where my wife was. We weren't in communication at the time. I forget the specifics, but it was a very interesting and enlightening few hours where father and son got to bond. And we talked about how difficult this was for me being in this spot. Obviously I wasn't getting much response besides crying and the other sounds you get of a truly newborn child. But it was very important for me to have these moments and really bond with Isaac and learn firsthand as a father, hey, this is what happens in life, and you just got to kind of roll with it. And luckily there was some nice support mechanisms in place.
So I think that many fathers experience that shock and awe in those first moments of birth, but in a biological circumstance, you have the 9 months of gestation to begin to bond at least with the concept of a baby that's growing. Do you think that as an adoptive parent, it was somehow different for you because this was, although you knew the baby was coming, it was out of nowhere that you became this new father?
Yeah, so usually in adoption, you're paired much earlier. We were literally paired, I think, 8 to 10 weeks before birth. It was a very unique circumstance that led us to being paired. And everything. I mean, it was a whirlwind. We literally were paired with this biological mother prior to even agreeing to sign on with the adoption agency. There was some circumstances that ended up working in our favor per se. So it was a complete whirlwind. The weeks leading up, things changed on the dime. At one point, we were going to go to the biological family's town, and I was going to miss Rosh Hashanah. And we had a new rabbi in Houston, a new senior rabbi. So he and I were literally making plans on having a support circle where I was going to end up going. And then literally during that same meeting, we were hashing this all out. My wife is calling me nonstop. Birth mother ends up delivering in Houston. So everything was such a whirlwind. You never knew what was coming and going, but it was really an exciting time. And there's so many of little pieces of that those few moments, those few weeks that I just have no recollection. But look, Isaac, for those who are part of our community here, everyone sees Isaac regularly at services and around the building. He's just a part of our family, and it's been an amazing almost 9 years now since I was brought into a room and there he was.
So what, if you remember it, what was your first conversation with Isaac?
Well, I remember telling Isaac as he was laying there, I said, well, it's just me and you right now. And I'm sure we're going to have a lot of moments like this, but we're just going to have to figure it out together. And still now, I mean, as he learns his way around, there's a lot of times he and I are put in situations where we're literally figuring out things as we go. Especially when mom's out of town or something, because mom definitely brings a lot of things to the equation that are just not my skill set. And Isaac and I figure it out, an adventure on our own quite a bit. And that's exciting. You never know what to expect.
And I think that's exactly the lesson here, that life is unpredictable. And for the most part, we are equipped as human beings to be able to figure it out. I remember when our children were born, I was so cautious about the changing of those first diapers. And then I watched the nurses just pick the baby up and flip them upside down. And I realized then that we likely can't hurt our children if we are thoughtfully connected to them. But for you, this was not somebody biologically connected to you. So did it take time to have a sense of that emotional connection?
Well, the thing is, it's very challenging because the first 2 or 3 days are kind of in question mark. Each state has different laws and requirements about when the birth mother can sign off. And so there's a lot of anxiety, and you get a lot of concern about making that connection, and then something, pooey goes wrong. And, I was not exposed to adoption until probably I was 30. I had a basketball coach in New Orleans where I worked at the time who had some foster kids, and he had a one for a year, and ultimately in foster care the goal is to reunite with the family. And so it was very challenging. We actually got national publicity for this, and it brought awareness to foster care and adoption. And so those first few days are kind of like a fog of emotion. If the birth mother decides, hey, I'm just going to end up keeping the child, I mean, that's every right to. So like every state is different. And I believe in Texas is either 48 or 72 hours. We couldn't even leave the hospital until it was all signed off with the social worker, et cetera, et cetera. So there's just a lot of motion, a lot of anxiety. You don't want to necessarily bring your family to the hospital to celebrate this moment because, you don't want that connection there in case something goes wrong.
So I can't help but think of how this applies in so many other places in the world. And so I want to transition our conversation from the birth of this child to the birth of the new stage of your career. We had a relationship with you through mutual friends. Temple Israel invited you to become our new executive director. It was not the same 72-hour trial period, but here you are in a new town, a new community, no connections, and you have found a sense of belonging here. So can you link those two experiences for you and how the birth of your child prepared you for this ability to just move to a new job, new city, new place?
Right. So coming here, like you said, there are no relationships. I think in a lot of ways, I had some of that foundational knowledge of how to manage a synagogue, having been in the synagogue world and very connected with executive directors, et cetera. But I also didn't necessarily know the culture. So you just you arrive, priorities change, just like when you have a child. Hey, if they get sick, your priority changes. So I came in with no perceived thoughts of what I was going to tackle first. Um, and that really rapidly changed pretty quickly due to a series of factors. And that was exciting to jump in and dive in. I think on my second day, someone announced they were leaving Temple Israel, and I had to it really, first day is always deer in the headlights, possibly a little longer, but really second day, I felt like I had to dive in. And then a few weeks later, I had a significant interaction with a congregant that really changed my focus here.
So I'm imagining you sitting in your office the first day having that same conversation, this time not with a little baby, but maybe with your pencil on your desk.
Right.
What did you say to yourself? What was your first conversation with Jason, the new Temple Israel executive director, sitting alone in your office now 9 years after Isaac's birth?
Right. Well, first off, it's like, am I able to get online? That, it's always interesting, like the little things. I don't even know where necessarily a pencil is your first day. Where's the supplies? Where do you get XYZ? So I think for me, it was like, all right, I left my congregational home in Houston where I grew up, where I knew every nook and cranny of that place. And then I found myself just walking around this building, really trying to take it all in. And like, I don't know where I'm going to go, but at the end of the day, I'm sure I'll find my way to the other, to the entry or the exit, et cetera. So it was really just talking to myself, reassuring myself that even though I'm coming into this new community, at the end of the day, synagogues, as different as they are very similar. And what I thought I knew and what I really do feel I know, I felt I could bring here and it would be successful.
And now, sometime later, what are you most proud of that you have accomplished over this time?
So I'm really most proud of we've really turned the corner on membership and engagement. Those have always been my strong suit, building relationships with people. Membership here has just blossomed in such an amazing way. I thought when I got here I could turn the spigot and like stop the drain of members. I didn't think we would just be reversing it and bringing in over 100 plus net new members within 2 years. It's just very powerful, and like to build relationships with these people who are new to our community, just as I am. It's been very good to really engage the congregation. And then like on Friday nights, I get there 30 minutes early because most of the congregation is here so early. And I just work the room and like I have deep relationships with these folks who are regulars. And that's what I enjoy. It's the relationships, always have. And it really allows you to do the rest. I mean, a lot of these congregations are so transactional, and we don't need to be. The relationships should relate to the transactional, but you don't start from a place of transaction. And I think that's where I believe this place is now.
As someone who watches you from the other side of the table, right? You're the operations of our business, and the clergy are the operations of our spiritual realm. I have really watched as those two realms have merged under your leadership. There's a sense that, as you said, the relationship leads to the membership experience, which leads to the commitment to people engaging with the synagogue. And, on the one hand, COVID set us up for this, right? People had left synagogue life and religious life, and now all of a sudden, here we are with people yearning for those connections, and your relational approach to Judaism has been a big part of that. So we are really grateful to you. And there are obviously also challenges. So what do you see as the biggest challenge for both Temple Israel specifically and Jewish communities in America right now?
Right. The word nostalgia comes to mind, and there was an article recently written. While I didn't necessarily agree with all elements, I think at the core, it was accurate that we get so hung up in the nostalgia And we as synagogues need to adjust to the change in environment. I think a lot of us created new priorities during COVID, new priorities in our life and our professional XYZ. And if we don't adjust to change, and change can be very challenging for people who are resistant, but we got to move past the nostalgia and adjust to where we are as a society today. And if we don't do that, that's going to be very problematic. I think we've made slow incremental changes here that have felt good and have been seen through to make sure they're successful. But I feel a lot of synagogues are losing members. Maybe they haven't adjusted the education, or maybe they use old liturgy for their Friday night worship. Here, there's new music, contemporary stuff every week. The sermons are relatable to what's going on around us. It feels different. So we've adjusted, and we've listened to the congregants' feedback. We've adjusted to what we're seeing, and I feel we're ahead of the curve, which benefits us.
To bring it full circle, I think of sitting in that room with a new child, unsure of the future, and simply taking the first step and knowing that everything will follow naturally. It reminds me of the rabbinic midrash about Nachshon, the famous Israelite who walked with the people out of Egyptian slavery, gets to the edge of the Red Sea, and it's not until he takes that first step in that the sea, according to our tradition, parts. In many ways, I feel that with you. You've just put your toe into the water. You said, I don't know what's coming next, but whatever it is, it's going to be exciting, it's going to be wonderful, and it's going to be responding to where our movement, our synagogue, our individual families are.
Yeah, no question. I mean, a priority for me, and I've made it a priority for some of our staff, is to be a part of these conversations. I'm on the North American board for the Reform Movement. I'm involved in my Executive Directors Association. I want to know what's going on elsewhere so I can take the best of that, make some tweaks, bring it here. We're not all in this by ourselves. We're in it together, whether it's a newborn child who has no expectation or clue what to expect, or a new executive director coming into a synagogue in a completely different part of the country. I think there's resources and people we can lean into to help us get to where we need to go.
And if we follow the tradition of the Jewish story, Israelites, even after that moment, complain.
Yeah.
Change is hard.
Change is hard.
It's a difficult thing. And yet, the result, Jewishly speaking, is finding our way to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the promised land. What do you see now? It's 2024. What do you see 2030 looking like for Jewish communities here in Metro Detroit and around the country?
So even now we're seeing geographic barriers have dropped, right? Here at Temple Israel, and probably in some of our colleagues around this part of the country, we have a lot of people who are in the South 5-6 months of the year. So continuing to build ways on how we connect to folks, whether they're 2 blocks away or 2,000 miles away, is going to be very fascinating. By already having an established presence online, we're ahead of the curve. But I think being able to build that community, both internally for the people who are coming to the building, but also outside, is going to be a major emphasis of where we have to go. I mean, we're going to have more people moving to the South who have these deep connections to Temple and want to remain connected to the Detroit metro community. And if we're not able to provide them engagement and touch points, that's going to be a big challenge for us.
I'm just glad you didn't say that AI is the future, because that's going to take all of our jobs away. So hopefully we'll still have those relationships that we can count on to propel us forward. So I think the lesson is so valuable and clear today that when presented with those moments of newness and change and just the unknown, step right in and have that first conversation with your child, because the result of that is the relationship that you have with a 9-year-old boy who is one of the favored sons of Temple Israel now. So thank you for sharing that story.
I was happy to share that story and give some insight into where we're going.
So one of the things I ask everybody at the end of my podcast is if there is something not connected to the subject matter today that you are reading right now or watching on television that is of interest, something that sort of is pushing you in a particular thought process.
So the latest thing I'm watching is called Welcome to Wrexham. It's about Ryan Reynolds, who obviously is famous from Deadpool fame, and this gentleman from It's Sunny in Philadelphia. Can't remember his name right now, but they purchased a low level football team in England, and it's very fascinating as Hollywood guys. And this started during COVID, and the soccer team has really made a impact not like around the world because you have these two, stars associated with it, and I like how they focus on the community element. It's like a docu-series on how they bought the team and how they connected with the community. And I'm a sports guy, obviously, but like I like the history angle, I like the community engagement angle. And while I just started and I know it goes through 3, 4 seasons, and I know where that football club is now, it's just amazing to see how they were able to involve the community because it was just a very community-based football club.
It's fantastic. You and I both agree that everything you need for understanding the world is found in the world of sports. So,
Right.
not a surprise that it's a sports television show that you're watching right now.
Yeah.
Jason, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate your insight. I appreciate the work that you are doing here at Temple Israel. We are very, very lucky to have you.
Well, I'm excited to be here. And, I tell people that the Saints won their Super Bowl a few years after I got to New Orleans. So for those listening, I really do think this is the Lions' year if they can get past the Texans.
So we've come to the end of another podcast. Thank you to everybody for listening and joining us today. I hope that you'll take the insights that we've shared and integrate them into your own personal lives. For now, we'll see you next time. L'chaim.